Coming up on Market Shares, one of the most popular social networks in the world is looking at a ban in the U.S. We'll have the latest on the case against TikTok and its effects on the social media world.
And the S&P 500 bouncing back up to regular numbers after a rough start to the week. We'll take a deep dive into all of the major markets.
And SVB hearings have commenced on Capitol Hill. We'll hear from both sides of the aisle on the controversial bank. Hold on to your wallets because Market Shares starts right now.
Good morning and welcome into Market Shares. I'm Teagan Brown.
And I'm Bradley Hoppenstein. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday morning. We begin as always with our market update. Let's start with the Dow, Teagan. You know, kind of a volatile quarter for the markets, but a winning week, and it ended up being a winning quarter. But a lot of moving pieces. With that said, let's take a look at the Dow, climbing about 3%, finishing around 33,274. And you can see that climb towards the end of the week, and that comes down to the Fed, one of its preferred inflation gauges, showing a cooler than expected increase in prices. So the core personal consumption expenditures index, which excludes energy and food costs, it rose 0.3% in February, less than the 0.4% expected by economists. So you see that tick up at the end of the week for the Dow, up about 3% on the week. Let's go to the NASDAQ.
Let's go to the NASDAQ. Another positive week for the NASDAQ, up about almost 3%, gaining 353 points. And it's been a great month. It's been a great quarter for the NASDAQ. I mean, later on in our show, we're going to have more of a discussion about kind of how crazy it was for all three of these indexes throughout. But for the month, the NASDAQ also gained about 7%.
And the S&P, a pretty good quarter, a good week for the S&P as well. A bit of some uncertainties still when it comes to inflation in the banking sector, but some of those tech stocks are pulling their weight, even as we still see layoffs in the tech sector. So the S&P up about 126 on the week, also about 3%, currently sits at around 4,109, and it's expected to keep going up as the year goes on. Let's go to our movers on the week.
Let's go to our movers. The first one, pretty close to home, Micron. They announced last year, they would be building their plant right here over in Clay, but not a great week for Micron. Let's take a look at the stock because they went down after China announced that they were going to be cracking down basically on chip manufacturers because of national security. The Cyber Administration of China said that they were going to be looking into this. Let's take a closer look at Micron. It went negative for the week, down about 1.41%. And yeah, not a great week for Micron, and it's kind of expected to fall a little bit more as China pursues these investigations.
Bit of a different stock I want to look at now, but Lululemon Athletica. Teagan, I know you were out last week, but I was talking with Peter.
Yep.
Analysts are predicting Lululemon is going to keep going back up. Its 52-week high is around 410. Right now it's at 364 a share, and that's because they announced earnings this week. I said last week they were expected to beat earnings. They announced earnings on Tuesday this week, and if you take a look at their stock, you see that big jump early in the week. That was on Tuesday, right after they reported their earnings. So Lululemon is moving back up. Earnings over $40 a share, up over $40 a share after they announced earnings. Sorry.
Yeah, and switching up from Lulu, let's move on to some entertainment, some sports gambling. Caesars Entertainment, they rose this week, definitely not as much as some of their competitors. Apologies for some technical difficulties right now. That's another show on Citrus. But Caesars Entertainment is holding the number 14 ranking among its peers in the gaming and equipment industry. They're also not doing as well with some of their casinos that they own right now. But overall, an okay week for Caesars Entertainment. Bradley, it's really interesting to see how sports gambling and sports betting has really affected the market lately. I mean, we talked about Bally Sports with Chillicothe Adeli a couple weeks ago. We've talked with Sean about different sports betting stocks. So, seeing these guys take a rise this week was interesting. Yeah,
Teagan, I feel like it's like every week you read a story like next year is supposed to be the biggest year for sports betting, next year. And that's really just because it continues to be legalized in more states around the country. Welcome back to Market Shares. Continues to be legalized, but we have some updates on SVB now, Teagan.
We do have some updates on SVB. The Senate commenced hearings on the Silicon Valley Bank collapse on Capitol Hill. The Senate Banking Committee discussed the potential charges against SVB officials, the speed of modern bank runs, and the danger of other banks going under. The two sides went back and forth, but Democrats and Republicans seemed to agree on one thing: SVB executives messed up.
SVB was terribly managed. They took a lot of seriously bad risks, particularly with their overweight in treasuries, 57%, as well.
Words that there really was, I think, a very bipartisan consensus that, number one, this was a gross failure of management by the bank. They should have seen this risk coming. Lots of other banks, almost all other banks did.
Meanwhile, a different crisis in the U.S. taking on a new strategy to fight its overdose crisis. The FDA has approved naloxone to be sold without a prescription, setting it up to be the first overdose reversing drug over the counter. Narcan is the best known form of naloxone as a nasal spray. It can reverse overdoses from opioids like street drugs like heroin and fentanyl, and even prescription drugs such as OxyContin. The overdose crisis is linked to more than 100,000 deaths a year, the majority of those tied to opioids, potent synthetic opioids that could take multiple doses of Narcan to reverse. But its maker, Emergent Biosolutions, says it hasn't found a price yet. So let's take a look at Emergent's stock now on the week. Shares soaring 11% higher on Thursday, up 25% on the week. It's going to have a new market for Narcan, so it's understandable why the stock jumped to end the week, and you can see that jump on Thursday morning.
And now we welcome into our studio our stock analyst, Sean Dempsey. Sean, what do you have for us this week?
Good morning, Teagan. Despite a downfall in financial banks last week, it seems like the market may be headed in the right direction. The stock market rallied this past week in all sectors after investors bought up undervalued companies. Three of those in particular are Spotify, Lyft, and Bed Bath & Beyond. Let's kick things off with the music streaming platform that's been a publicly traded company for 5 years. Spotify announced 2 weeks ago that it crossed 500 million active monthly users. The company unveiled a new mobile interface that allows users more space to share their work and listen to music. On top of that, Spotify has spent $1 billion pushing into the podcast market to compete with Apple and SoundCloud. At some points in 2022, it felt like shares would never stop falling, with the stock down 66% last calendar year. In 2023, the audio streamer is seeing a change in momentum in its stock price. Spotify is up 55% year to date, along with an overall resurgence in growth stocks this year. This was after reporting strong user growth for the fourth quarter of 2022. And as you can take a look at Spotify's 3-year chart, this was during COVID. The stock just was fantastic because people were using Spotify and listening to music all of the time because they were stuck inside. But since then, the stock has just absolutely tumbled and is a great undervalued company right now. Now, let's switch gears to a company that has been in the news lately because of some changes in management. Lyft's co-founders Logan Green and John Zimmer will step down from their day-to-day roles as CEO and president. Former Amazon executive David Risher will take over as CEO of the ride-sharing company. After the news was reported Monday, shares rose 5%. Green and Zimmer took Lyft public in 2019 to compete with their top competitor Uber. The company went public at $80 per share, but since then, Lyft hasn't come close to reaching that mark and now sits down over 80% from its all-time high. So this is Lyft stock, right? This is when it went public. It had a rough couple of years, like most IPOs do, trying to get investors to buy into what they're doing. But then it jumped up in the second half of 2020, and Uber did as well, because COVID was coming to an end and more people were traveling. And finally, a retail store announced this week that it may have to file for bankruptcy. Bed Bath & Beyond said this week that it was finished the day on Friday at its low of 43 cents per share. The company had one of its worst days ever when the stock dropped 28% on Friday. So how did they get to this point? How did a store that stock price was as high as $74 per share in 2015 come crashing down? Well, Bed Bath & Beyond was able to initially avoid bankruptcy in February by completing a stock offering that gave them more funding. But now the company is terminating that deal with Hudson Bay Capital. Instead, they're trying to sell $300 million of common stock to stay alive. Yet it doesn't look like this will do much, as the retailer plans to close 400 of their 760 stores. So this is Bed Bath & Beyond stock. You're probably wondering, what the heck happened in August of 2022? So if you remember over the summer, what was trending in the headlines is that meme stocks were just skyrocketing like this. And that is exactly what happened. The stock rose 300% in a 2-week span, which is just absolutely incredible. But since then, the stock has tumbled to an all-time low of 43 cents per share. Guys, that's all I got.
All right, Sean, thank you. After the break, a full update on Sam Bankman-Fried's case. Stay with us.
Here's to the straggly ones, the lopsided ones, the first ones, the I miss my beard ones. And hey, I look good with this ones. But no way he's grown that in a week ones. The black, brown, red, and gray ones. That one. The itchy ones. The never forgotten ones. The ones grown by Dad. The ones grown for Dad. The started late ones. The absolutely filthy ones. The drawn on ones. The finger ones. The pin ones. The I nearly didn't do it this year ones. And the yeah, why not ones. They all raise awareness, raise funds, start conversations, and save lives. Because whatever you grow will save a bro. Learn more at Movember.com.
Welcome back to Market Shares. Federal prosecutors are now saying that FTX co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried paid out millions of dollars in bribes to at least one Chinese official. The indictment alleges repeated efforts to bribe Chinese officials. We have Dominic Chiappone in studio to break down the specific charges against Bankman-Fried and others. So, Dom, what's the latest on him and the now bankrupt crypto exchange?
Bradley, just when it looked like the dust finally settled with legal troubles from Bankman-Fried and FTX, U.S. officials last week revealed a series of pretty noteworthy allegations, and let's start with those allegations themselves. In this federal indictment, U.S. officials accused Bankman-Fried of authorizing a bribe of, quote, at least $40 million to try to gain access to trading accounts that were frozen by the Chinese authorities. Now, this is according to reporting from The Guardian. Those allegations are allegedly part of his trading firm, Alameda Research, which U.S. officials claim holds up to $1 billion in cryptocurrency. Now, these federal prosecutors in Manhattan claim the accounts were unfrozen after the bribe payment was transferred from Alameda's main trading account to a private cryptocurrency wallet. Bankman-Fried allegedly authorized a transfer of, quote, tens of millions of dollars in cryptocurrency to complete the bribe, and this is according to the indictment. Now, the interesting twist is that according to the lawsuit, the incident happened before FTX's collapse in 2022, when reports about the company's finances led to a rush of withdrawals and pushed the crypto firm eventually into bankruptcy. And interestingly, this isn't the first time Bankman-Fried was accused of bribery or financial corruption of some kind. Prosecutors last month unveiled 4 new counts against Bankman-Fried, which accused him of allegedly orchestrating an illegal campaign to donation schemes to buy influence in Washington. But this new accusation broadens the scope of alleged corruption from the national to now the international level. Bankman-Fried will likely be charged with violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which makes it illegal for U.S. citizens to bribe foreign government officials to win business. Now, U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan of New York scheduled a hearing for this Thursday, and this came after U.S. prosecutors asked to compile all 13 counts against Bankman-Fried and FTX into one trial. Now, Bankman-Fried remains on house arrest at his parents' home in California on $250 million in bond. Bradley and Teagan, obviously, this is the case layered with accusations and charges, and there was a lot that could play out between now and this pending trial. But regardless, it's definitely been a fall for grace from the former billionaire, who could face up to 100 years of prison if found guilty of all these charges.
Dom, you mentioned there's looming challenges behind both these allegations and the pending trial. So what exactly needs to be sorted out before Bankman-Fried makes an appearance in court?
Obviously, when you have a situation based on bribery, and especially bribery with a foreign agent or another nation internationally, that obviously in itself is already complex. But the challenging thing is, can you put all of the accusations that are against Bankman-Fried into one trial? There's been reporting by multiple news outlets that say they are worried about witness tampering in the event of a fair trial, because after all, what we've seen based off the financial schemes of Bankman-Fried in the past, it's not to say that this can't happen again. So ultimately, I would say that's kind of what you're going to be watching out for here, is kind of what are the specifics of the trial. Will this be a civil or a criminal one? Will we have multiple trials in the first place? I think that's definitely going to be ironed out by this Thursday.
Dom, obviously, you know, a lot of confusion here within this of criminal versus civil and all of that, but based on your understanding, what exactly is the biggest narrative to watch for in regards to this upcoming trial on Thursday, or judicial hearing, excuse me?
I mean, obviously, when it comes to anything like this, especially with Bankman-Fried and the FTX's mega rise and simultaneous mega fall, this is going to be the narrative on big business and on the corruption behind the scene, especially now that we have an international agent in charge. But you have to also look at why the U.S. is especially interested in this, especially because this allegedly happens to be a Chinese official. And you look at what's been going on with the TikTok hearings, to China's efforts in Taiwan and the lingering tensions there, to the Kamala Harris being in Africa to push back on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. This is kind of in a bigger picture. It hasn't been talked about yet. Part of an effort for the U.S. to maintain its dominance and prevent any foreign interference whatsoever.
Dominic Chiappone, thank you so much. And now the pandemic's lasting effects are still being experienced, but for some businesses, that effect is good for profit. Crocs, as in the slip-on shoe company, you know, those shoes you usually wear during the summer, has seen a sharp rise since April of 2020. This chart that you're looking at right now shows just how much the stock has changed up to today. Crocs stock has increased over 700%, and the company says they don't see those numbers going down anytime soon. Back in November, they said they project $5 million in sales over the next 3 years.
And a green future is moving closer. The Energy Administration says electricity from renewables passed coal for the first time in 2022. Wind and solar driving the increase, contributing 14% of domestic energy last year. California producing 26% of solar energy, with Texas and North Carolina close behind. The most wind energy coming from Texas with 26%. Iowa and Oklahoma both behind it with around 10 each.
And the metaverse was once a place where people believed the future resided, but can it compete against AI technology? Both Walt Disney and Microsoft have put a pause on their metaverse plans, and the biggest advocate for that virtual reality platform, Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, has put the focus on AI over the past month.
And there's been a lot of talk about Meta and the metaverse versus AI, like you said, Teagan. A lot of important tech heads, such as Elon Musk, actually signing a paper earlier this week saying, hold off on developing new AI for about 6 months. And you can see Meta, it's been a shaky year for Meta, and their revenue actually dropping last quarter. Meanwhile, the U.S. housing market has been volatile since the start of the pandemic. Now we're at a crossroads with a split in value between the East and West Coast. Our numbers analyst, Jacob Goldberg, is in studio with more. Jacob.
Thanks, guys. The prices on the East Coast and West Coast differ dramatically. We're going to look at the East Coast first and see some of the biggest economic areas such as Miami, Florida, Orlando, Florida, Buffalo, Hartford, Tampa, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Virginia Beach. You know, some of them not exactly on the East Coast, but east of the Mississippi, and we're seeing such drastic pricing or rising in prices. These areas are getting a lot more expensive for people to live. But as we go to the west, they say West Coast, best coast, and if you're looking for a house right now, that is certainly the case. San Jose, San Francisco, two of the biggest economic areas surrounding Silicon Valley, dropping below 10% of what they were just, a few months ago. Seattle, Washington, Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, and San Diego also seeing those effects. So here's a map to visualize it. I talked about it a little bit in terms of the data, but this just really gives you a good picture of what I'm talking about. All that red on the West Coast means that pricing in housing has dropped. Now we look at the East Coast, this entire belt, all green, that means prices are rising. Why is this though? Why are these prices falling in the West and rising in the East? Well, in the West, due to the tech industry, and a lot of job firings, people are canceling their contracts on homes, bowing out of their home search because they're afraid they're going to lose their jobs. We're seeing that in San Francisco and San Jose, two of the biggest areas around Silicon Valley. And once again, people are moving to Florida, companies are moving to Florida as it's a tax haven. There's job cuts in major economic areas in California and many other western states that have led to people trying to move to the East Coast. Pandemic drove up housing in the West and lowered it in the East. So now it's kind of getting back to that median, and we're seeing the prices lower in the West as they were really high before and rising in the East when they were lower. And lowering in home availability. There's not many homes available in places like Florida as people move. That's going to drive prices up. So we'll see if this trend continues, but very fascinating to see that difference between the West and the East Coast.
Jacob Goldberg, thank you so much. And coming up on Market Shares, Luke Radel is in studio with this week's political headlines. Stick with us.
Meet Norm. He lives with anxiety, but with the help of this latest innovation from Be Normal, he can be normal, just like everyone else. With the swipe of a finger, you can project happiness, confidence, machismo. Why settle for being real when you can be normal? The Normal Maker, new from Be Normal. This item doesn't really work because there's no such thing as normal. We're all different. What we like, how our brains work. In fact, 1 in 5 of us live with mental illness. Don't filter who you are. Start by talking to someone you trust. And remember, there is no normal.
And welcome back to Market Shares. Let's go to political analyst Luke Radel with his week in review.
Teagan and Bradley, is time up for TikTok? Welcome into politics. I'm Luke Radel. Our main story this week concerns the most downloaded app in the world. TikTok has over 150 million American users, but that could all change soon. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are proposing a ban on the popular app. But why? There are 3 main questions. Number 1, is TikTok just too addictive? Judging by this couple's experience on Dr. Phil, the answer is probably yes.
Nino is on TikTok 24/7. It drives me insane. He is on his phone at least 10 hours a day, 70 hours a week. That's an insane amount of time.
She's right. That is an insane amount of time. But that's what the app is designed to do. It's designed to keep you scrolling and scrolling, and that can really have negative consequences, particularly for young people. Kids and teenagers are getting hooked on the app, and research indicates that teens who are addicted to TikTok experience worsened depression, anxiety, and memory skills. But the danger might not just be reserved to one side of the screen. What TikTok does on the other end is the source of question number 2. Is TikTok spying on you? Here's TikTok's CEO being asked that very question and not giving the most reassuring answer.
Has ByteDance spied on American citizens?
I don't think that spying is the right way to describe it.
So just how much does TikTok know about you? So just how much does TikTok know about you? The answer is a lot. That's how they're able to tailor videos so specifically to your taste. Up front, they collect your name, your age, your phone number, your email, your approximate location, and mobile device identifiers like your IP address. But they also log all of your interactions with videos or accounts to gauge your interests and target advertisements to you specifically. The company has said that the TikTok app is, quote, not unique in the data that it collects compared to other mobile apps, which begs the question, why are we singling out TikTok over this? Here's Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in a video posted to TikTok about TikTok, making this point.
And they say because of this egregious amount of data harvesting, we should ban this app. However, that doesn't really address the core of the issue, which is the fact that major social media companies are allowed to collect troves of deeply personal data about you that you don't know about without really any significant regulation whatsoever.
So what makes TikTok so special? Question number 3. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is based in Beijing, meaning it could be subject to laws in China, like one passed 6 years ago, that mandates companies to hand over their data to the government when requested. TikTok's CEO was asked about whether the Chinese government has ever asked for American TikTok data. Here's what he had to say.
Congressman, I have seen no evidence that the Chinese government has access to that data. They have never asked us. We have not provided.
Well, you know what?
I
find that actually preposterous.
I have looked in. I have seen no evidence of this happening.
So look, whether it's happening or not, here's the point. TikTok has raised a series of concerns about its addictiveness, effects on young people, collection of user data, and potential for manipulation by an adversarial foreign government. I think one Republican congressman at the TikTok hearing summed up this whole saga with a particularly poignant and simple question at the end of the day.
You have unified Republicans and Democrats. And if only for a day, we're actually unified because we have serious concerns. Does TikTok support good? I mean, is TikTok a platform for good? Just yes or no?
I believe yes.
Okay.
Moving on, elsewhere in politics this week, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Africa to promote U.S. economic ties to the region. Harris says she believes the future of innovation can be found on the continent.
African ingenuity and innovation, I am certain, will shape the future of the world.
In other international news, the Biden administration announced a new trade deal with Japan. The office of the U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai says the U.S. and Japan have promised to increase labor and environmental standards. Tai also said the deal shows, quote, proof of President Biden's commitment to building resilient and secure supply chains. The deal comes after the Biden administration signed the Inflation Reduction Act last year that offers generous tax incentives for electric vehicles that source their materials for batteries from the U.S. or from countries where the U.S. has trade agreements. And speaking of the Inflation Reduction Act, the deciding vote on that law seems to be having second thoughts. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin penned an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal called Biden's Inflation Reduction Act Betrayal. The West Virginia Democrat writes in part, quote, when President Biden and I spoke before Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act last summer, we agreed that the bill was designed to pay down our national debt and shore up America's energy security. Yet, instead of implementing the law as intended, unelected ideologues and bureaucrats and appointees seem determined to violate and subvert the law to advance a partisan agenda that ignores both energy and fiscal security.
Lou Radel, thank you so much. When we come back, we'll recap the wild market quarter report. Stick with us.
Hi, my name is Sadie Miller.
My name is Luke Brady. I go by St. Luke.
So this one I started with this guitar lick.
Most party fouls are pretty dumb. But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving. The ultimate party foul.
It's been a crazy quarter for, right now. I mean, between investors at the beginning of the year feeling pretty confident about it and inflation kind of knocking that down a little bit.
Yeah, it was a very interesting quarter, Teagan. Let's take a look at the indexes there. Very interesting quarter. We didn't think the Fed would raise rates again. They did. No one anticipated that collapse in the banking sector, and it's been really interesting watching that recovery in the markets.
But there has been no widely anticipated recession as of right now, but that's definitely something we'll keep an eye on, and that is all the time we have for you on this episode of Market Shares, but be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CitrusTV News and like us on Facebook. I'm Teagan Brown.
And I'm Bradley Hoppenstein. Have a great week.